Welcome to Developing the Leader Within podcast, the podcast that brings you leadership insights from the brightest minds shaping our world. Join us as we dive into conversation with trailblazers, innovators, and change makers, spanning every corner of the globe. Get ready to explore new perspectives, gain actionable insights, and become the leader the world needs today. Unleash your potential. Tune into Developing the Leader Within podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Let's embark on this transformative journey together. Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now and help us get to our next milestone. Today, we are speaking with Carlos F. Orta. Carlos is the president and CEO of the Latino Coalition. He has served in 5 prestigious Fortune 500 companies and as a CEO of a prominent DC-based DE&I advocacy nonprofit. He is a LinkedIn top voice in equity in the workplace and the author From Havana to DC, The Rise of Cuban Americans in Florida Politics. Carlos, welcome to the show.
Gracias, Enrique. Thank you for having me today.
It's our pleasure to have you. And I'm excited, folks, because we will be speaking about leading with integrity, governance, and inclusion in the modern workplace. And Carlos, this is something that most leaders don't think about, but I wanted to highlight the fact that, hey, laws affect us in the workplace. Laws affect us as leaders. But before we get into that conversation, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, thank you again. And listen, really, most importantly, I want to thank you to your service to our country. It's commendable. We owe you and everybody else a debt of gratitude. So thank you for that service. Well, I was born in Cuba, and we left Cuba. We went to Spain because at the time we left, we couldn't go directly to the United States. We lived in Spain for a couple of years till we had enough money to come to Miami, Florida, which is what I call the free Cuba. And so that's where I grew up. That's what I consider home, even though I live in Washington, D.C. today. When I was about 8 years old, I visited a friend's father who was an accountant at an architecture company. And from that day on, I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build beach houses. That's what I thought my life was going to go. At Miami-Dade College, I realized that the math was just a bit too much for me. And so my little sort of world shattered about becoming an architect and building beach houses because I couldn't handle the math. But early on early on in my career, I discovered that, I loved helping people. And I loved helping people by either solving their challenges or helping them become better, helping them become the leader that they are, right? Which is leadership is really very important. And I believe that most leaders are created. Now, some are born, but most are created, right? We have it within us. We learn how to be leaders. And so I learned that early in life, and that's taken me through the rest of my career. I started in public service, actually in politics, working on campaigns. Then I transitioned from campaigns, and this is all in Miami, Florida, into governing. I worked for a couple of state legislators. I ran what they call the Miami-Dade County Legislative Delegation. And from there, I decided to join the corporate sector, as you said. And so I joined Anheuser-Busch, Carnival Corporation, Ford Motor Company, Tyson Foods, and Waste Manager. All great companies. Learned a lot about those industries. But again, all of them are consumer-driven industries. They touch the customer, and I really enjoyed those companies because of that, engaging with the consumer. And then at some point, I decided that, an opportunity came my way to run a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. And so I did that. It's called the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. Most Latinos would know it as ACER. And I was there for 8 years. We created some phenomenal programs. A lot of governance went into that. It's actually part of the mission of ACER, in particular when it comes to Latinos on corporate boards. And so I did that for 8 years. And now I'm back running another nonprofit, the Latino Coalition, based here in DC. This April, I launched my first book, as you said, as you mentioned, From Havana to DC, The Rise of Cuban Americans in Florida Politics. And the book is, my sort of my love letter to the first group of Cuban Americans that were appointed or elected to public service. I started when I was very young, when I was 21. And so I had the opportunity to work with most of those folks, either directly or indirectly. And it was an amazing opportunity. And from there, I was able to do incredible things, both in corporate and in the nonprofit sector, from all the lessons that I learned working in politics and with elected officials, including Ileana Ross Layton, who was the first Latina to serve in Congress. So, honored to have started with her. And anyway, I'm now decided to go back to school and get my master's in liberal arts. And so I'm at Georgetown University. I've got one more year to go. And when I retire, whenever that is, I want to be able to teach a couple of classes in political science. So I'm married. Marianne, my wife, runs a nonprofit here in DC, and she's been doing that for 13 years. Um, and that's a little about me.
Amazing trajectory for someone that came from somewhere else, right? And a lot of landscape today is not conducive to a lot of this right now in the political scheme and platforms that we see each other now on TV. But it's amazing how someone with a vision of better can do so many great things. And thank your wife as well for her work with nonprofits as you guys continue your service. Now, you talk about governance. We are a leadership podcast, and I often see that a lot of leaders don't understand that governance, whether it's something that is external by the government or something that's internal, has a lot of power over their people. So I wanted to ask you, how can leaders create governance structures that ensure inclusivity at all levels of decision making in the organization?
Sure. And you're right. You hit it right on the head. Both laws at the state level, at the local level, and obviously at the federal level, plus regulatory bodies, right, will dictate a lot of governance that happens in corporations or in nonprofits. I've served on about 25 nonprofits across the country throughout my career. And the first thing that I always look at is their bylaws, right? That's sort of the document that you look at. That is what runs the corporation. That is what you send up to the state when you're going to register that nonprofit. And so to me, it's really, in terms of the diversity aspect of it, it's intentionality. You have to be intentional about how do you want that governance structure to be and who do you want on your governing board, right? And so I'll give you an example. When I had the opportunity to be chair of the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce about 5 years ago. And in the office, there's this massive boardroom, seats about, I think, 30 people, okay? The board of the chamber is 75 individuals, which is huge. The executive committee is 25 folks. And all the past chairs have their photos on the wall. So as you come into the room, you have 50, 30, 40 photos, everybody in the room. And so obviously the first group of photos were all white males. And then, you got your first Latino and then your first woman. And I would walk into that room, probably once a week or every other week. And I looked around and I saw very few African Americans. And Miami is 20% African American. And so when I became chair, as I was becoming chair, I said to the board, I want to make sure that we're reflective of our community. We've got great talent. And so we set up a sort of a governing structure that included African Americans, but also Latinas. It had been a long time since a woman had been chair of the chamber. And so I'm really proud of that. But you have to be intentional. That's number one. And that, I think, is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, intentionality in everything we do as leaders is so important. You have to have that in mind. Folks that are listening, if you're a leader and you're not being intentional, what you'll do is you'll sway with whatever it is that's coming your way. That's just the way it is. And so having that intentionality, and I love how you put it, you took notice, you was aware, and you said, hey, there's something missing from a representation of where we are. And so let's handle that. And so good on you for doing that. A lot of that transparency, right, is often missing from a lot of governing bodies and a lot of corporations. So what role does transparent governance play in fostering an inclusive workplace culture? And how can leaders ensure accountability in that area?
But even before I get to that question, back at the chamber, so the Greater Miami Chamber is the sort of what I call, the main chamber, right? There's the Latino chamber, South Florida, and there's an African American chamber. And I noticed that the leaders of those two organizations were not participating with the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce. And so they would show up to certain things, but not a lot of things. So I started to invite them to come to the meetings. We had an a monthly meeting, to host them at my table. I also hosted a variety of nonprofits, right? Because these are business people. Most businesses give back. And so I hosted a bunch of nonprofits to come and sit with us at the table. And it was a really interesting sort of little experiment. But then other companies started to do the same. And again, I think, intentionality is really key. In terms of transparency, that's crucial, right? You have to be transparent. That is what generates trust. And I believe when you work in an environment where there's transparency, where there's trust, you're going to be successful. People want to know, they want to know your vision. So, where are we going? How are we going to get there? And then, how am I going to be measured? What are the results, right? So that's important. And people, if they're trying to figure it out, if they're not sure, if the communication coming to them isn't clear and concise, then things start to pop up in their head. And so you have to be transparent. You have to show, especially it's mandated by law, whether it's a corporation or a nonprofit. You have to have certain information available to the public, right? And I think there should be more of that. There's also obviously organizations that rate charities, and again, a big part of that is how transparent are you? Where are the funds going? How are you spending your money? And so that's key. You as you think about joining organizations, and in particular nonprofit boards, I always ask, can I see your records? Can I see your 990s? Can I see the tax returns? Because as a board member, it's your fiduciary responsibility to ensure that organization is running well. And if they're not being transparent with you, I would have concerns about that.
That's very key because you talk about transparency, but you also talk about compliance, and a lot of companies or even leaders don't understand the depth of what they're responsible for in compliance. So, how can organizations balance compliance with governance policies and the need to adapt them for more inclusive workplaces?
You mentioned leaders, right? So I think great leaders want to be held accountable, right? Because again, you said you're going to do this. This is how we're going to do it. This is how it impacts you, and here are the results. And so, if you have leadership that doesn't want to be held accountable, again, I would consider going somewhere else. Um, Great leaders are transparent, great communicators, and they want to show you the way. They want to model how to get to where you are. Again, you look at if it's a company that does business, within, let's say, the Latino community, African American, whatever community it is, they need to have representation both on the team level, the staff level, and the management side, and the board of directors. One of the things that we did at ACER is we produced a corporate governance report every year, and we highlighted the companies that had Latinos on their boards, the companies that had Latinos on their management as well, and the ones that didn't. And again, that was us wanting to show here's the information, right, to the general public, and engaging them in an advocacy effort to say, if you really want to support a company, is that company supporting your community, causes that you care about, right? It's a two-way street. I've got a friend of mine, a mentor, I'm sure you know, his name is George Herrera. He's on the board of Travel and Leisure. And George has this great quote and saying, he says to companies, right, when they say, well, we can't find them. We've looked for you, but you can't find them. We can't find a Latino or Latina for our management team or on our board. George says, well, you know how to find me when you want to sell me a product, right? You've got the tools, you've got the resources, you've got the effort to find me when you want to sell me something. Take those same tools, resources, and efforts and put them to finding somebody to join your board.
That made me chuckle on this side because hey, it's true, right? When you want to sell me something,
You can
I'm
find
right
me.
there, right? And
You know where to find me. Televisa, Univision, Telemundo, the radio, el periodiquito. But you can't find me to sit on your corporate board or in your senior management role. But you still want me to, buy your product. It's reciprocity, right? And so, I think it's one of the probably the best quotes I heard in terms of when somebody says, "I can't find somebody." I'm like, "You're not trying hard enough."
definitely that we talked about intentionality earlier, right? And so this is one area where they should implement that. Now, you also spoke about metrics, right? And measurements and things that we can not only earmark but actually get to. So, in what ways can leadership use data and metrics to measure the effectiveness of governance structures in promoting inclusion?
So data is, in corporate America, data is key. Peter Drucker, the great guru in management, said, basically what gets measured gets done, and what gets measured gets results. So companies are all about measurement, data, and results. As from an HR perspective, right, as you look at the landscape of your employees, they know exactly how many employees they have. They know the race. They know how long they've been there. There's ways to use data to project out. Look, over the next 10 years, X number of people are going to retire. X number of spots are going to become open. And so, as you look at the different divisions within those corporations, you'll say, look, in this particular division, we don't have enough women, or we don't have enough men, or we don't have enough African Americans or Hispanics, or whatever the group is. And so using that data, right, is really important because that's how you can project out where opportunities are. And I think, the majority of people, that's what they're asking for, right? Is an opportunity to do great and to see a path forward. When I joined Ford Motor Company, one of the reasons that I joined, and by the way, this has never happened in any other company that I've worked at, they sat me down and they said, look, for the first 2 to 4 years, we're going to have you in Atlanta, Georgia. And you're going to manage 2 or 3 states plus our Hispanic outreach program across the country. If you do well, right, and you produce, and that's not a given, but if you do well and you produce, we're going to move you to Detroit. You're going to have to come to Detroit. That's where their headquarters is. And there, we're going to put you a rotational assignment in our philanthropic arm. You'll spend a couple of years there understanding how a $100 million, I think the time was $125 million nonprofit foundation operates. Then we're going to take you, we're going to put you in our public policy shop. So you understand how we form public policy and how you can understand, basically how the sausage is made. And then your last assignment, within that space, we're going to send you back out to become a regional manager. So you'll become responsible for anywhere from 7 to 12 states. Somewhere at that time, Ford had, I think, 7 regional offices for government relations. And I got really excited about that because I saw the future. I saw the opportunities. They were going to give me the training, right? And so that was important. But it was really up to me to be successful and to deliver and to go above and beyond and make sure that the opportunities that were in front of me, that I was able to, reach them and do it quicker. And that's what people want. They really want opportunities. But that data goes back to the data they knew from the time they hired me, right? How many people were going to be moving around, how many people were going to be retiring, how many spots would be open. And so what they did was basically said, here are the 3 opportunities, 3 to 4. If you produce and you do well, the runway is yours.
And I love that clearing of a view for you because I don't think that I've ever been part of anything outside of the military that has been clear as day like that, right? In the military, you get a structure. Hey, it's on a pay scale. And if you meet this, you get here. If you don't, you stay where you are. But they actually clear that up and they give you an inkling of, hey, these are how many spots will be available by that time. So it's a wonderful thing as an employee to come into an organization that has that already cleared out for you. So, wow, wonderful that you had that experience. And I hope others listening are able to do that as well, because that does a lot for us, right? Now,
Oh, I mean, Anita, what that taught me was when I started to manage people and hire people, was what it taught me was to I did the same thing with them. I said, listen, within if you came in at this level, here are your opportunities, and within the next 3 to 5 years, here's where you could go. And it's going to be really up to you and how you deliver and how you exceed expectations, right? Not just meet expectations. I mean that's what we pay you for, right? I'm a huge believer that we pay you to meet your expectations, but you need to go above and beyond if you want to be super successful. You want to continue to move up, you have to exceed those expectations. But you also know where they're going to lead you to, right? And so like I said, I have no other company, and I've worked at phenomenal companies. No offense to any of them, but Ford was the only one that laid out this runway, this pathway for me. And it's affected me for the rest of my life in a great way.
yeah, and I love it. And I hope that the listener or viewer is taking notes, because that's a great thing to add to your leadership toolbox for you to be able to do that. If you could do that for your folks, they'll be eternally grateful. I know for sure. Now, leaders have a challenge, and it's how do I implement this? How do I put these governance things into practice? So, what challenges do leaders face when trying to embed inclusive practices into the governance framework? And how can they overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, you need to know where you're going. You need to have that roadmap. You need people from the beginning, right? You need to get a group of folks to work with you on the plan. You can't work on things by yourself. It doesn't work that way, because you need the team to get behind you and to be supportive of whatever you want to do, right? And so in corporate, it's called you got to have the buy-in from the team. Even though you may be or she may be the CEO of the company, you still need to have the buy-in from your direct reports. And so to me, it always starts at the top, and because that's where everything gets set, whether it's a military, whether it's the private sector, the nonprofit sector, government, starts at the top, way to where sort of works its way down. So you have to make sure that your direct reports and the one away from you are on board, right? You have to have healthy, open discussions. You should create an environment where people feel that they could challenge you, that they could ask you questions, um, that it's you're not going to get penalized for speaking up or thinking differently, right? I think the whole success of Apple, and Steve Jobs nailed it, was think differently. In corporate America, we tend to think all alike, right? And so, and this has been proven that if you get a group of people who came regardless of race or color, who came from the same place, they went to the same schools, same neighborhoods, same everything, you're not going to get very good, diverse ideas and thoughts and products, right? Because you have to, how that works is everybody has their own story, everybody has their own way of thinking, of looking at things. When you have different people working on a project, you're going to be much more successful if you have a diverse team versus a homogeneous team.
Yeah, I love that. You have to bring in, and we've been talking about leadership from the beginning, but that intentionality, that know-how of governance, that ability to take what you have and implement it, give your people a roadmap, get them set up for success for their future with you, and ultimately help them overcome obstacles, because there will be some, right?
Absolutely.
And you just have to be ready to do that. Carlos, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. And you mentioned the book, you mentioned the nonprofit. So, what do you have coming up, and how can the viewer or listener get a hold of you, or purchase the book, or get involved with what you're doing?
Sure. Well, again, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you, and thank you for your service. Amazon, SD, Target, just Google From Havana to DC plus book, and you'll find it wherever they're sold. Um, Follow the Latino Coalition. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm a huge believer in LinkedIn. I think it's probably one of the best creations ever. It beats a Rolodex 100 times, the old school Rolodex. I keep track of everybody. My cell phone 202-664-9798. I'm accessible. I think part of being a great leader is that you have to engage with folks and then be accessible, right? And so I'm happy always to share that. My email, CORTA at the Latino Coalition.com. Um, and what's next is, like I said, I've got another year left on my master's. Um, Continue doing some great stuff. The Latino Coalition turns 30 next year, so we're super excited. We're working on a celebration and a legacy project. I'm a huge believer that as human beings, we're here to leave a little legacy, and what that legacy is up to you. But I've tried to leave a legacy everywhere I've gone, and I encourage others to do the same. And it's not always monetary; it's ideas, it's concepts, it's programs, it's policies, procedures, but leave a little legacy. And I'll leave you with that.
Outstanding. Well, they say time, talent, and treasure, right? So choose your legacy, but leave it. And that's the important part. Carlos, you've done a great job in doing that, and we really appreciate it. Folks, we will have all the links on the video and show notes for you to be able to get a hold of them and also connect with him on LinkedIn. Now, today's episode is sponsored by Fantail Services and Superpass, which are powering our website and app. Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, The Outlier Project, and Duco. And if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment. And we're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to our show. So if you know someone or have a topic that you like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we love to hear about it by leaving us an email at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And this podcast is brought to you by StreamYard, a browser-based tool that lets you live stream to any platform and record podcasts in studio quality. And we're using it to record this podcast. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.